In this video, we'll break down the two primary types of data stores offered on vSphere, VMFS and NFS. Let's start by taking a look at a VMFS data store. So there are many different types of storage arrays that you could potentially purchase. In this particular slide, we see an iSCSI storage array that's been deployed. Now, there's a lot of other options out there. There's fiber channel over Ethernet, right? And basically the big difference between those different options is the type of network that they use. In this case, let's assume that it's an iSCSI storage array, which is a VMFS storage solution. Right? Fiber channel and fiber channel over Ethernet are also going to utilize VMFS data stores. So for the moment, let's just get rid of our ESXi host here on the left-hand side of the screen, and let's focus purely on the storage array itself. So this is an iSCSI storage array. And you can see here some of the key characteristics. Our host is going to communicate with the storage array over an Ethernet network. And the storage array is equipped with two storage processors. Right, we've got our nice little redundant connections here just in case one of those Ethernet switch fails or in case the storage processor fails. And just think of the storage processors, those are like the brains of the operation, right? And this is the same if you're dealing with iSCSI or fiber channel over Ethernet. What's really different about those three different types is these types of switches that we're going to use here. With fiber channel, we're going to use a fiber channel switch fabric. With fiber channel over Ethernet, we're going to use an Ethernet switch. And same thing with iSCSI, we're going to use an Ethernet switch. And then on the right-hand side, we've got the actual storage array itself, right? So the storage processors are kind of like the brains of the storage array. They also provide connectivity. And then we've got a shelf of disks called our aggregate. That's all this physical space that this storage array is equipped with. And we're breaking down all of that physical space into smaller chunks called LUNs, logical unit numbers. And that's all that a LUN is a chunk of space on a storage array. So now that we've kind of got the storage components figured out here, we can see the ESXi host also connects up to these Ethernet switches, or maybe it's fiber channel and they'll connect to the fiber channel switch fabric. Doesn't matter. In either case, it's kind of the same concept here. Right? And so now that we've got an ESXi host with a communications channel where it can speak to the storage array, and we have these LUNs that are created on the storage array, now we're in a position where we can actually go ahead and start creating some VMFS data stores. And the first step of that process is a significant step. We have to discover targets. Right? So, and I'll just kind of focus on iSCSI at the moment. So here's my ESXi host, right? And I want to create a data store that is properly formatted, that has the correct file system, that's going to allow me to store virtual machines. And right now, I can't do that, right? These LUNs are chunks of raw, unformatted disk space. These are just chunks of space. Think of them similar to, a physical disk that you just pulled out of the box. Right? There's nothing on these. There's no file system present. I can't store anything on these disks just yet. Right? Same thing with LUNs. They have to be formatted before they can be used. So with iSCSI, we're going to use a method called automatic discovery or dynamic discovery. And the first step is to configure the host with the target IP address. Right? So we're going to tell our ESXi host, okay, if you want to discover the available LUNs, this is the address that you should query. You should query 10.1.1.0, or I'm sorry, 10.1.1.10, which is the IP address of our storage processor. At which point we can perform a rescan on our ESXi host and have it query that storage processor, have it generate what we call a send targets request. And the storage processor will receive that query and it will respond with a list of all of the available LUNs that it has. Now my ESXi host knows about essentially the blank disks that it can use, right? The big chunks of raw unformatted disk space. There's 3 of them. And now we can choose one of those LUNs and create a data store on it. And when a VMFS data store is created, what essentially happens is this. The space on this LUN is going to get formatted with the VMFS file system. And it is now going to be presented to my ESXi host as a data store. Right? We'll call it data store 1. Right? And now I can start storing virtual machines on it, right? Because the LUN has now been formatted with the VMFS file system. And it's now suitable storage for my virtual machines. Okay, so when you think about VMFS, kind of think about that concept of we have LUNs. Right? With VMFS, we have LUNs. LUNs are like raw unformatted disks, and they have to be formatted with the VMFS file system. This is very different than the way that NFS works. NFS is a whole different ballgame, right? And so with VMFS, let me jump back a slide. With VMFS, these LUNs very much behave as if they were physical disks, right? I can even have an ESXi host with no local storage, and it can boot from one of these LUNs. Right? So we can even do stuff like that when it comes to VMFS. NFS is very different, right? I cannot boot a host from an NFS share. That's not possible. There's no VMFS involved when we start talking about NFS. There's no VMFS. There's no special file system, right? The NFS device owns its own file system. It operates its own file system. And what happens is the ESXi host simply accesses a shared folder. Right? We call these an NFS export. There's going to be some folder that we create on this NFS device or network attached storage device, whichever you want to call it, that we are going to present very similar to a shared folder. We're going to present that to our ESXi hosts. The ESXi host doesn't have to format it. There's no file system to be created. Right? And aside from the ability to boot from SAN, there's really not a lot of feature differences between an NFS data store and a VMFS data store. Really, the only 2 things that NFS does not support, I should say the only 2 really key things, are the ability to boot a host from SAN and the ability to create a raw device mapping. Right? I can't give a virtual machine direct access to a LUN because I don't have any LUNs. So raw device mappings are not supported. Right, so let's take a look at how my ESXi hosts actually connect to an NFS data store. And here on the left-hand side, we see a virtual machine with a virtual SCSI controller. And just like we talked about in the storage virtualization video, my guest operating system, Windows in this case, is going to generate SCSI commands. And as they flow out of Windows, they're going to hit my virtual SCSI controller. And from there, they're going to hit a storage adapter. And in this case, the storage adapter is pointing towards this NFS data store that we've mapped. Right? So the SCSI commands are actually going to be pushed over to a VM kernel port and transmitted across the network to the IP address of this NFS system. And the data store that we created was created on a specific folder, and the ESXi host has root access to that folder. So now as my virtual machine generates SCSI commands, they flow out, they're prepared for transmission on the network, they hit a VM kernel port, flow over an Ethernet network, hit the interface on the NFS system, and are redirected to the VMDK for that virtual machine that exists on this NFS storage system. So again, really quickly, just to review, with VMFS, we want to think of VMFS as having LUNs, chunks of raw disk space that must be formatted. And we can boot our hosts from those LUNs. With NFS, the file system is already in place. There's no formatting required. The file system is already there. And we're just basically accessing a shared folder that was created on that file system. Right. So you'll notice if you ever create an NFS data store, they don't take very long at all to be created because there's no formatting, there's no zeroing, there's nothing like that. It's just done. You mount your shared folder and you're finished. So in this lesson, we learned about VMFS. We learned that iSCSI, Fiber Channel, and Fiber Channel over Ethernet storage arrays utilize VMFS. And within the storage array, there are these raw, unformatted LUNs that the ESXi hosts must format with the VMFS file system, whereas NFS has its own file system independent of ESXi and no formatting is required.